As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
We have a very arduous journey ahead of stabilizing our country, stabilizing the economy. Once again, aligning our country with the rules-based international order is very important for us. And also creating this new chapter for Bangladesh. We have to remember that the many revolutions have taken place across the world over the last decade or even the last 2 or 3 decades. Winds of change blow, and sometimes the revolutions become a false dawn. So it is very important, and we owe it to the martyrs of this monsoon revolution, that our revolution does not become a false dawn. And the true aspirations, the true goals of the people of Bangladesh are realized once again.
From the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, welcome to another episode of the Security Nexus Webinar, where we explore the most pressing security challenges and geopolitical shifts shaping our world today. I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at DKI APCSS. It's a pleasure to have you with us for episode 25, Bangladesh in Turmoil, the revolution, its fallout, and the road ahead. On August 5th, Bangladesh's longest-serving Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, resigned after 16 years of harsh rule, marking the end of a significant era in the South Asian nation of 170 million people. This momentous event followed weeks of escalating unrest sparked by student-led protests against a controversial quota system for government jobs. Initially focused on government job preferences for descendants of freedom fighters from the 1971 Liberation War, the movement quickly escalated into a broader rebellion against Hasina's government. This revolution surprised many, given Bangladesh's impressive economic progress in recent years, with significant strides in poverty reduction, infrastructure development, and social indicators. However, this economic success could not mask the deep-seated political discontent, corruption, and social inequalities that ultimately fueled the uprising. Bangladesh gained independence from Pakistan in 1971 after a bloody liberation war led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the country's first president, who was assassinated in 1975. His daughter, Hasina, led his Awami League since 1981. Her tenure as Prime Minister began in 1996, during which she alternated power with her rival, Begum Khalida Zia, Bangladesh's first female Prime Minister. Despite the international community's silence on the unfair elections in January of this year, the growing economic woes and discontent among everyday Bangladeshis laid the groundwork for Hasina's eventual ousting. In the lead up to her resignation, Bangladesh was gripped by chaos, with reportedly more than 800 students and other demonstrators killed during 3 weeks of clashes with security forces. Amid this turmoil, Nobel Peace laureate Muhammad Yunus was sworn in as the head of the caretaker government on August 8th, following a request from the protest movement student coordinators. Much of the nation's future now rests on the shoulder of the 84-year-old Yunus, who has taken on the role of chief advisor to the interim government. Today, we'll explore the key events that led to this revolution, the figures who have shaped its trajectory, and the daunting task ahead for Professor Yunus and the nation. We'll also consider the broader implications for regional stability and Bangladesh's future as it navigates this critical juncture. To help us understand these complex developments, we are honored to welcome Shafqat Munir, a Senior Fellow of the Bangladesh Institute of Peace and Security Studies and an alumnus of this center, the DKI APCSS. Welcome, Shafqat. It's a pleasure to see you again and to welcome you to our program.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would love to ask our guests to begin by telling us a little bit about their journey, their story. So maybe you might do that.
Thank you. I'm a senior fellow at the Bangladesh Institute of Peace and Security Studies, which is an independent think tank based in Dhaka. I work on a whole spectrum of security issues, including counterterrorism and CVE, South Asian security, the Indian Ocean, and so on. I have been in the think tank world for most of my professional life. In the past, I've worked with the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. I've also been a security consultant in the private sector in Singapore. And a lot of my work over the years has been on counterterrorism, on South Asian security. And increasingly, I'm also doing a lot of work on countering disinformation as well. I'm very proud to say that I'm a two-time alumni of the DKI BCSS. I had the privilege to attend the Advanced Security Cooperation course in 2018 and returned again for the Comprehensive Security Cooperation course in 2022. And
You
I'm
know, I
also
remember when you were here, Shafqat. You were here in 18. That's when I first met you. Uh,
absolutely,
and and I
absolutely.
remember when you came back and the director took the opportunity to award you in front of the entire class for completion of your fellows project. You have continually made significant contributions in your country and in the region, and I remember those events very distinctly. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much. Thanks for those kind words. I also want to mention that I'm also a handful of second generation alumni of the center, and my father also attended a program at the same center in 2006.
Yeah, no, we remember his time here with us as well. And I also think he came out to a workshop at Harvard that we did there with him as well. And so, again, thank you for that sustained contribution, for sharing with us your background. Of course, you have been um, quite in demand lately, have been on other programs and have been prolifically contributing to the space. And so, um, the group here is familiar with, no doubt, with a lot of your timely work in this area. I thought maybe we might, as it were, start a little bit back and understand some of the prelude to the revolution. Ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's long tenure, I mean, it saw significant political and economic developments, but also mounting discontent. So this is the question. What were the key factors that pushed Bangladesh towards revolution?
Well, there were several key factors. I think to begin with, there was this whole issue of disenfranchisement. Under former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's rule, Bangladesh went through three deeply flawed elections in 2014, in December 2018, and most recently in January 2024. So I think the most important issue was the people's voting rights were taken away, and the whole integrity of the election process in Bangladesh was lost. And as I have said time and again in various media appearances, and also during my time at the center, that when you have such a large population, as you rightly mentioned at the beginning, over 170 million people, you can only suppress this population for so long. Coupled with the whole idea of disenfranchisement, there was also the issue of democratic suppression. People's voice was taken away. People were not allowed to speak. There was hardly any concept of media freedom. There was widespread suppression of civil society. For instance, just to underscore this point, I probably would not be able to take part in a webinar like this and speak so freely had it happened a few months ago. So I think a lot of things sort of coalesced together. And the foremost issue was continued suppression of democracy, continued suppression of rights, continued suppression of civil society, and mounting income equality. As you might have seen from media reports over the last couple of weeks, how large stashes of money has been found in the houses of various oligarchs and other officials related to the regime. Some of the figures are so staggering that it almost beggars belief. So I would say it was not just one issue, but a combination of different issues which accumulated together over a period of time and led to a final explosion.
I want to pull a little bit more on those roots of rebellion. I mean, you brought up a little bit about the economic issues and some of the inequality and there's political corruption, there's social tensions. All these help brew this widespread dissatisfaction across these various sectors. And so, I mean, just pull more on that and help us understand those issues that fueled the revolution, and how did the different groups contribute to the momentum?
Well, as you said, it started essentially as a movement for the reform of the quota. And then people gradually started to talk about the other demands. And in the end, it became a one-point demand for the ouster of Sheikh Hasina. I want to underscore that this revolution, and there is no better way to cast it but as a revolution, and I call it the Monsoon Revolution, was essentially a people's revolution. Initially, it was spearheaded by the students, but then all professional groups joined in. People from all walks of life joined in. And by the end of it, everybody was out there: students, mothers, children, fathers, people who are day laborers, people from various professional groups, workers. Everybody was out there. And it was nearly 16 years of accumulated anger, rage, discontent with a regime which had become so detached from its people that it did not even hesitate to use brutal violence. I just want to underscore the point of violence because I think it's very important for our audience and the wider Ohana out there to understand what we went through. According to latest reports, on the 4th of August alone, that is the day before Sheikh Hasina finally resigned and fled away, over 400 people were killed. We still don't have a proper accounting of how many people were killed or wounded, and the figures are still emerging. But according to UNICEF's report, 38 children were killed during the period between 1st July to 5th of August. So not only did the regime refuse to listen to people earlier, but when they tried to protest or voice their opinion, they were brutally put down. I would also argue that if Sheikh Hasina had stayed on after the 5th of August, and she would have managed to contain the rebellion, more people would have died. So it was a regime by the end of it which had become completely detached, almost divorced from reality, and it had refused listening to people. And another point we must remember that democratic aspirations of people can only be suppressed up to a certain point. And as time and again we have seen both in Asia, in the Middle East, and other parts of the world, that at the end of the day, there is an expiry date for such authoritarian rule. And when that expiry date comes, no matter how much pressure you use or no matter how much you manipulate, ultimately all the opposition coalesces together and becomes an absolute juggernaut. And that is exactly what happened in Bangladesh. But I also want to say that I'm really glad you brought out the point about the paradox between economic prosperity and other forms of injustice. Because yes, on one hand, there was a degree of economic prosperity, and Bangladesh has enjoyed significant economic growth. But too often, the other part of the story was ignored by many across the world. So I think it's important that we put that record straight as well.
Thank you for pulling on a little bit about the revolution, the key revolutionaries, and helping us to understand that. But I wonder, I mean, who are some of these political leaders, these activists, these civil society groups? Maybe you might, share a little bit more of that, and how did they actually influence the revolution's direction and maybe the post-revolution landscape that we see today?
So at the vanguard of this revolution are the students, university students, in some cases even high school students or college students, as we call them in Bangladesh. They're the ones who came out. And then they were joined by civil society, they were joined by professional groups, they were joined by a plethora of different individuals. And as our chief advisor, Professor Muhammad Yunus, who is a global icon and a Nobel laureate, has said time and again, including in his latest speech to the nation, that students were at the forefront of this movement. But it is also important to acknowledge the role of civil society, many of whom have been through the DKI IPCSS or have participated in DKI IPCSS programs over the years. The civil society, I would argue, kept the flame of democracy blaze or lit over the years. There was also a huge role played by Bangladeshi activists based abroad, including in the United States. Because there was a time when people, those of us in Dhaka or in other parts of Bangladesh, were not able to speak. It was these activists who, through their YouTube, Facebook, and other social media activities, kept the world informed about the things that were happening in Bangladesh. So I would say it's a combination of different groups who played a significant role. And I would particularly like to single out the students, the academics, because the academics also played an important role. The wider civil society, which includes rights groups, think tanks, various NGOs. And then one important dimension in the case of Bangladesh was these non-resident Bangladeshis who played an absolutely critical role. And their role was very significant because they basically informed the wider international community about what happened. Because we also went through a period where there was no internet in Bangladesh for about a week. So it was basically their voices which were informing what was going on in Bangladesh, the wanton killing, the destruction, and so on. So while the students are at the vanguard, it is also important for us to acknowledge the role played by the other groups. The other political actors also need to be acknowledged. I want to say that this was largely a people's revolution and not led by political parties. But by the end of by the end of the uprising, various political parties had also joined in, and they pledged their solidarity to the people. Because whenever political parties alone have tried earlier, they have been brutally suppressed, as we saw in October 2023 as well. So this revolution offers us many lessons, and I would like to talk about those in the coming questions.
You spoke about the internet blackout, and so I'm thinking about media's role then in this revolution. And I mean, typically, an era of rapid communication, traditional social media, I mean, they play a crucial role in spreading the revolutionary sentiments. And so maybe you might just share with us then, how did the use of media and technology facilitate the organization and the momentum of this revolution?
Absolutely. It's a very important question. I think media and technology played a huge role. So what we saw as the revolution began to gather pace or gather steam, the hitherto suppressed Bangladeshi media, both electronic and print, gradually tried to find their voice again. So whether it was newspapers or television channels or other sort of media outlets, they slowly began to voice and highlight the things that were going wrong, albeit under significant amount of censorship and curbs imposed on them. But what really was a force multiplier in this revolution was the use of technology. So, for instance, when the internet was shut down around the 18th of July, uh, since it was largely a revolution led by young people, and this is a very important point that I want to underscore, that this was a Gen Z revolution. So one thing we have learned from this particular episode in Bangladesh, and I think it offers the lessons for the wider international community, that if you really want to outrage the Gen Z, please shut down the internet, because it really angers them like nobody can actually imagine, and also that they're very innovative and agile. So, for instance, when internet was shut down, the students and the youth groups found various apps such as Bridgify, Rumbler, and so on, which works purely on Bluetooth. Or when mobile data or cellular data was shut down, they found out how to open the Wi-Fi networks in a certain area and use those to communicate. They were also very agile in constantly using social media to mobilize and to inform. For instance, spontaneous protests broke out in several neighborhoods in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, where the mobilization was done within a very short period of time using apps such as WhatsApp, Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, and so on. So the key takeaway for us is that, yes, traditional media played an important role, including international media, which kept informing the global community about what was going on in Bangladesh. But it was a very tech-led revolution. And even a draconian measure as shutting down internet for 6 days did not really manage to sort of suppress the momentum of the revolution, because the revolutionaries, the people who were out in the streets, were so adept at using modern communications technology.
Hmm. Insightful. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the military's role. I mean, the military's actions, without a doubt, galvanized the revolution. But help us understand, what role did the armed forces play, and how did their actions influence the revolution's trajectory?
The armed forces played a very important role. The armed forces played a very important role because I would very vigorously argue the ultimate coup de grace was delivered by the armed forces. Why? Because the armed forces refused to carry out unlawful orders of a regime which wanted them to kill and injure more people and suppress the rebellion or revolution. So it was made very clear by the leadership of the armed forces that they were no longer willing to take part in sustaining a regime which had lost the support of the people. And I would want to zoom out a little and talk about why this happened. I would argue that this happened because the Bangladesh Armed Forces, is an armed forces born out of the Liberation War. And so it has a very organic connection to the people, number one. Number two, due to their prolonged exposure in United Nations peacekeeping operations, we have been for many, many years either the largest or second largest troop contributing country in the world. And through our exposure to international programs, including programs under the IMET assistance of the United States, the Bangladesh Armed Forces, the current generation of Bangladesh Armed Forces, value and understand the importance of the role of a military in a democratic society. And I think if there was ever a need to reinforce the need for programs such as IMET and others to educate militaries across the world about the role of military in a democracy, this is probably a great case study. So whether it is the generals of the armed forces or the mid-ranking officers, some of who, I mean, I'm sure some of our armed forces alumni are listening in today, and also the soldiers, there was a clear message that they stand with the people. And I'm reminded of a speech by the former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, that ultimately an armed forces belongs to a republic, not to any ruler or any wannabe dictator. And I think that was a message that was very clearly underscored by the Bangladesh Armed Forces. And I'd also say that this is what really sets the Bangladesh Armed Forces apart as a professional military from militaries like the Tatmadaw in Burma, who are willing to continue to kill their own people and suppress their democratic opinion.
Very nicely said. Thank you. I want to zoom out a little bit, use your own words, but let's talk about the global influence. I mean, this revolution did not occur in a vacuum. It was impacted by the geopolitical interests of neighboring countries and, frankly, global powers. So here's the question. How did the international dynamics actually shape the course and the outcome of the revolution?
I think the fact that the international community had started to take note about Bangladesh's democratic suppression, the disenfranchisement of the people, and the huge international attention that the last election received, including from the United States, went a long way. Because countries which stand with the rules-based international system made it very clear that such efforts at disenfranchisement were not welcome. And the fact that certain individuals were put on notice through visa restrictions and the like. For instance, when the European Union cancelled a very important meeting after they had seen how the movement was being suppressed, those things send a message to the wider populace that the international community, and again, I want to underscore the part of the international community which stands with democracy and freedom. They had made it very clear to the former government of Bangladesh that such tactics were not welcome. So that was very important. There was a great degree of solidarity also expressed by people across various countries. and this was evident through the media. For example, spontaneous protests broke out in the state of West Bengal in India, which is our neighboring state, with whom we share the ethnicity and the language, the Bengali language and the Bengali ethnicity. Spontaneous protests broke out. And they were also talking about how the student movement was being suppressed in Bangladesh. But I think here we saw an important marker, which I think is very important very critical for us to remember, that there was a clear division between countries who stood for democracy, freedom, and liberty, and countries which did not. For instance, there was scarcely any message of support or any message of solidarity or even concern from countries like China and Russia. Whereas from the United States, from countries in Europe and further afield, there was a huge degree of support, whether it was from the governments or from the civil society or the people. So once again, we see that how polarized our world has become between countries which stand for democracy and countries which do not stand for democracy. And this is again a very important marker for us to remember that the rules-based international system for which we all strive, how important it is not just to make sure that the world remains peaceable, but at the same time to ensure that democratic voices are heard across the world. I hope that explains your question.
It does. I think I'll pull on that a bit, though. I mean, you brought up perhaps some of the three largest actors in there: United States, China, India. All three have strong influence with Bangladesh, and so maybe you might just, say a little bit more about those countries and their positions vis-a-vis Bangladesh.
India's position is very crucial because I think India is our largest neighbor. We have a massive land border with India, over 4,000 kilometers, one of the longest land borders in the world. And India, we are India's largest neighbor in terms of the length of the land border, although India has several other neighbors. So it has a huge stake in what happens in Bangladesh. India's situation was a bit different because there is a perception in Bangladesh that India has always been aligned with one particular individual and one particular political party. And therefore, this change has come as a major jolt for the Indian establishment because they're still trying to grapple with the change, political change there in Bangladesh. So what we have been urging from Dhaka to the Indian authorities, that it is very important for them to recognize that a revolution has taken place, and it is a people's revolution where people's aspiration has been voiced. And it is important to signal to the new interim government led by Professor Muhammad Yunus that India is ready to work with them. And there has been some initial contact between the two governments. There has been a conversation between our chief advisor and the Indian Prime Minister. So we hope that India will basically signal to us that they're ready to stand with the people of Bangladesh and they're not hung up on the ouster of the previous regime. I think that is very critical. The United States has been with us throughout this struggle. And I again want to underscore that contrary to many of the conspiracy theories being fooled by various media outlets, including Indian media outlets, this was not a revolution sponsored or backed by any country. As I have said in an interview recently, this was a revolution for Bangladeshis, of Bangladeshis, and by Bangladeshis. Yes, having said that, countries like the United States played a very important role in supporting our aspiration, not over July and August, but over a long period of time. It was US sanctions in December 2021 that first informed the world about the flagrant human rights abuse committed by law enforcement agencies in Bangladesh on the orders of the previous regime. It was the support of US lawmakers which basically kept our civil society in at certain times from harm's way. It was the support of various US media outlets which basically informed the world about what was happening in Bangladesh. So the United States and the wider Western world were constantly urging the previous government that people's voice must be heard. So I think that is also very important. There was also a huge role played by the United Nations, not only in documenting what was going on, also aiding human rights and other rights-based groups, and basically trying to help the democratic aspirations of the people to reach fruition. And for example, I mentioned about the UNICEF report about how many children were killed. So those multilateral institutions like the United Nations also played a role. But having said that, I think I would say that there were countries, for instance, like China, who kept saying that this was an internal matter until the very last. So for them, this has also come as a bit of a jolt because they had so aggressively aligned with the previous regime, thinking that they were going to be here forever, that now they have to really recalibrate and find something in common with the new order. So I think it's very important to understand that, as I have said earlier, that by their stance in terms of supporting this movement, this revolution, we could clearly see which country stands for which values.
Oh, thank you for that. I want to go a little bit further. I want to talk about foreign policy leadership and direction. So with Tawid Hossain, who we know here, he's an alumnus of APCS's executive course back in 1998. He's now serving as the Foreign Affairs Advisor. So a question might be, how might his leadership influence Bangladesh's foreign policy direction in this transitional period?
Mr. Tawid Hussain is a very capable diplomat. He has been the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs earlier. He's also, like me and many others, an alumnus of this great institution, DKI-APCSS. As an aside, I must say that a few months ago, I had a very animated conversation with him, recounting our shared time together at 444 Nahua. So all my APCSS Wahana out there would know what the significance of 444 Nahua is as an accommodation. But he was telling me how profoundly his outlook on global issues had changed after his time at APCSS. And in those days, they used to spend 3 months at the center as part of the executive course. Mr. Hussain has already signaled that Bangladesh will pursue a balanced foreign policy, and the foreign policy would be based on our national interest, on consensus, on identifying what our core interests are. And he has also very clearly signaled that Bangladesh, the new Bangladesh, or as I would like to say, Bangladesh 2.0, will stand very firmly on the side of the rules-based international system. So in going forward, we are going to see a recalibrated foreign policy because I must mention that under Sheikh Hasina's regime, the foreign policy up after a certain point had become foreign policy based on slogans and catchphrases. There was very little sort of ballast to it other than declaratory statements. So I think this new interim government, and we saw some articulation from the chief advisor as well, is very keen to have a foreign policy which is balanced, which is focused on safeguarding and protecting and promoting our national interest, and one which will stand with the rules-based international system. So I think some of the statements, like his statement to the Russians saying that we have to be careful about how we deal with certain Russian entities because you are sanctioned, that would have never happened before. And we're also very fortunate that we have a professional at the helm, somebody who has been a practitioner of diplomacy for a very long period of time, and somebody who has attended many important global institutions like the DKI-APCSS. And yes, I think we are very excitedly looking forward to a rejuvenated foreign policy direction under his leadership.
Well, you can certainly pass our regards when you see him again. We thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about economic consequences. So revolutions often have significant economic repercussions, short-term and long-term. So we would ask ourselves, what immediate economic impacts did the revolution have on Bangladesh? And then what are the anticipated long-term economic consequences of this?
There is one pressing issue that this government needs to tackle, it's the economy. By the end of July 2024, the economic condition had worsened to a significant point. Bangladesh, for instance, right now has 156 billion US dollars in debt. And one of the things that ultimately led to the removal of the previous government was widespread discontent about their economic management and the crony capitalism that they had promoted. And I'm not even talking about the humongous amount of corruption that was carried out and the money that was siphoned away. And the details are emerging, but we'll touch on that a little later. So I think the stabilization of the economy is probably the biggest task ahead of the government. And within that, I think one of the most important tasks would be banking reform, because our public sector and many of our private sector banks are in quite serious distress. There is a need for wider fiscal reform. There is a need for ensuring that uh, spending is done in a disciplined manner. And then the other important task is to promote the growth of industry and invite foreign investment. I would say those are more medium-term issues. Improve the ease of doing business, which has been a major concern. But stabilizing the economy, managing the debt, managing the banking system, and ensuring that our interaction with multilateral financial institutions and countries is done in a manner where we do not become a victim of predatory economics. So I think that is or enter into a debt trap. I mean, those things are very important. I'm very heartened to say that the chief advisor has assembled a top-notch economic team. He has also tasked one of our most famous economists to come up with a white paper on what needs to be done within 3 months. So we are on a good trajectory, but the road ahead for economic stabilization is going to be a tough journey.
Yeah, without a doubt. And your noting of the economic centrality to core issues that have to be gotten after can't be understated. But either can this next issue, which is about human rights and civil liberties. Revolutions often involve significant human rights violations and shifts in civil liberties. So the question that I want to ask is, how were human rights and civil liberties affected during the revolution, and what steps have been taken to address these issues post-revolution?
There were significant human rights abuses by the then government over the course of the revolution. As I said, we are beginning to only piece together what actually transpired. Not only were people killed by Sheikh Hasina's government, people were injured in large numbers. Hundreds of people were blinded. At least 38 children died, in some cases shot in their eye. I mean, I don't even want to go into the level of brutality because it makes for very sort of, it will sound very grim and depressing. But suffice to say that so much human rights violation happened just over the 36 days alone that it could fill volumes. And then there is the whole issue of human rights abuse over the 16 years. I have been talking about how people are traumatized and in various my other media appearances. And there's a need for addressing their sort of the abuses that were committed to them. And there is a need to heal and create a process of reconciliation. We are coming to terms with secret prisons. And I have been to some of the secret prisons in former East Berlin, which are now museums open to people. But some of the descriptions I have read about secret prisons in Dhaka would make major political prisons like the Stasi prison in East Berlin pale in comparison. So it is very important for the interim government to address the human rights piece. We have a very noted human rights defender, now part of the cabinet. And I think the government has already started a commission of inquiry and also a commission to memorialize the contribution of the victims. So that is very important. This government and any future government that may come after this will always, or that will come after this, will always be very careful going forward I hope, and I think all Bangladeshis hope, in preserving civil liberties and honoring human rights. Because the way we have seen human rights trampled over the last decade and a half and more has really left a very searing wound in our mind. And I'm really optimistic that not only will the perpetrators be brought to justice, but it is also important that a process of reconciliation begins where Bangladeshis can come out of this trauma, reconcile, heal, and begin a new chapter.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the regional impact. So the revolution in Bangladesh, I mean, it sent shockwaves across South Asia and perhaps and beyond, altering, I would argue, the regional dynamics for some time. So here's the question. How has the revolution impacted regional stability? And what are the potential long-term global implications of the revolution?
I think one of the key messages out of this revolution for the wider region is that uh, dictatorships cannot really work. And I think the message will go out to people who are aspiring for freedom and liberty across the wider region, including in our neighbor Burma or Myanmar, that ultimately people's will triumphs. It will also send a message to regional actors that uh, it is important to be on the right side of history and stand with the aspirations of people and not base one's relationship with just an individual or a regime. This is also a message to the wider region that the Gen Z are very dynamic, very innovative, and very capable in articulating their opinion and voice, and they cannot be suppressed. It is also a message that no amount of brutality, as we have seen over the period of July and August, can suppress when people rise up for a just cause. So I think the regional reverberations will be felt for some time. And we are already seeing how this particular monsoon revolution in Bangladesh has fueled protests in Pakistan, energized the youth, and I'm sure the reverberations would be felt in other parts of the region as well. So I think this monsoon revolution in Bangladesh offers very important lessons. And I would again like to highlight that the most important lesson is when the youth and students of your country rise, you only try to suppress them at your peril.
You know, I want to talk a minute about Bangladesh's future and where this goes from here. And so, without a doubt, Bangladesh faces uncertainty. But let me ask you this question. What challenges does the new leadership face, and what are the prospects for the future?
The new leadership faces, in my opinion, three key challenges. One is economy. I have already dwelt on that a little bit. There is a very key challenge of establishing law and order and ensuring stability, and that is coupled with the economic progress as well, because if you want to ensure economic stability, if you want industry to grow, and if you want foreign investment to come, stability is an important prerequisite. So ensuring law and order, ensuring stability, ensuring that the security apparatus plays its right role is very critical at this point of time. And we also have to remember that there is a need for urgent security sector reform. And that is an area where organizations like DKI, APCSS, and partners like the United States can play a critical role in the coming days. But there is a need to the most important task right now is not only to ensure law and order and stability, but also to pave the way for a certain degree of economic growth and economic stabilization. And coupled with this too is basically the whole need to reunite and I would say rebuild the society. This is not, ladies and gentlemen, a transition from one government to another. This is a transition which has been the result of a people's uprising and revolution. And many people, including the chief advisor, are saying that Bangladesh has been liberated and new. This is a second republic. And then begins the most earnest task of rebuilding and recreating institutions which have been left in tatters over years of abuse. So I think these are the three key tasks. Some of them are short to medium term: economic stabilization, law and order, and then the long-term task of institution building, where we will earnestly request the help of the wider international community in helping us create this second republic.
Thank you. I want to transition now to the audience questions, and we have several.
Sure.
So let's go with this first one, and it's about security and military involvement. And the question is this: why were the security forces, including the military, ineffective in controlling widespread violence that targeted your minorities there in Bangladesh?
We have to acknowledge that some violence did occur against minority groups, but we also have to acknowledge that there is an awful lot of disinformation about the level and extent of that violence. The security forces were actually very sort of aggressive in the way they put out the violence, and very quickly they brought the situation under control. As I have said time and again, that even one death or one act of vandalism against a minority community is too many in my book. But at the same time, we have to be circumspect in the way we sort of analyze these incidents, because I see a lot of disinformation in the media and with very outlandish numbers being presented. It was nothing like that. And it is also important for me to say that the Bangladeshi people came together and displayed a degree of social resilience and unity in not only condemning this violence, but also standing guard against it. There were cases where students of madrasas were guarding Hindu temples. There were cases of communities coming together to ensure that their brothers and sisters from Hindu community and the other minority groups are not targeted. So I think that is also that needs to be understood. A revolution by nature is chaotic, and after a revolution happens, like in all countries, there were certain scenes which we probably should not have had. But it is important to say that the Bangladeshi state very quickly tried to bring it under control.
Oh, thank you for that. The next question is about geopolitics and foreign influence, and it's asking, how does the turmoil in Bangladesh allow China to increase its influence there? And it's asking particularly in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. And I guess if I were to think back many years ago, a decade ago now, you were on the brink of signing an agreement to construct a deep sea port, and there's been other efforts. But so this is what it's asking: is it China's increased influence? Does this give space for it?
Let me take a step back and talk to you a little bit about how China's influence spread under the previous government. This is not a very well-known fact that in 2018, the Awami League, the ruling party in Bangladesh, and the Chinese Communist Party signed a party-to-party agreement. And the CCP does not have party-to-party agreement with many ruling parties in this region. And after that, we saw a burgeoning sort of security relationship and a burgeoning sort of political or bilateral relationship with China, which also included a visit by Xi Jinping to Dhaka and also visit by Sheikh Hasina to Beijing very recently. I do not see any reason where China would be in a position to extend its influence after this revolution. If anything, the new government has already signaled that all projects, including BRI projects, will be reviewed. And it has also signaled to China and all countries very boldly and clearly that while it is desirous of equal relationship with all countries and wants to pursue a friendship with all actors, but it will be a foreign policy based on protecting and preserving our national interest. And although they have not said it in so few words, a foreign policy which will be based on an alignment with the rules-based international system. So, of course, as an important major global actor, we will engage with China, but I do not see any reason to think that China's influence would be greater under this new government. If anything, new democratic post-revolutionary Bangladesh be more keen to work with democracies.
Next question is asking about political and social dynamics. Did Sheikh Hasina's pro-Indian Hindu policies contribute to her downfall by helping Islamist forces topple her?
I don't think Islamist forces toppled Sheikh Hasina. This is an erroneous assumption. This was a people's revolution. This was largely a secular revolution. This was a Gen Z revolution. And for most of the Generation Z, there is very little room for sort of giving primacy to one religio-political belief over the other. But I think it is important to note that there is a perception which exists in Bangladesh even today that Sheikh Hasina's regime was too aligned to a particular country, and that is India, and that India had also aligned itself too much to just one individual and one political party, and Sheikh Hasina's regime also did not pursue a balanced foreign policy, and that is a very important perception which must be addressed. But I don't think in any way it would be right to say that the Islamists toppled Sheikh Hasina. It was a people's revolution and it was a secular revolution.
Okay. Next question is asking about regional impact. How will the crisis in Bangladesh affect Myanmar, particularly in the Rakhine state and particularly regarding the Rohingya population?
This new government is very committed to finding a more innovative solution to the Rohingya problem. The Sheikh Hasina government, through the Rohingya policy that they were pursuing, did not really make a significant amount of headway in the end. And sometimes their policy was influenced by certain countries. And a lot of decisions were being taken which were not really anchored in what people in Bangladesh believed should have been done, but were influenced by certain countries and their actors. So I think this new government is very committed to finding a durable solution to the Rohingya problem. It is paying very close attention to the evolving dynamics in Rakhine, and it would want to see how we can basically forge a relationship with a Myanmar which is also changing and new power centers which are evolving in Myanmar.
Next question is on human rights and civil liberties, and the question is asking, how were human rights and civil liberties affected during the revolution, and what steps have been taken to address these issues post-revolution? Now, I acknowledge that you addressed some of this earlier, so this may be an opportunity to pull a little deeper.
I think, yes, I have already talked about it a little bit, but I would say that an urgent task that this government has undertaken is to address all the human rights abuses, document all the human rights abuses, and bring the perpetrators to justice. And there is a fair amount of transparency in the process. For example, people who have been in secret prisons run by intelligence agencies have been allowed to come out and speak, talk to the media, recount the horrors that they have gone through. And I think this government very clearly understands that human rights abuses, not only over the past month, but over the entire period of the previous government, need to be documented, perpetrators brought to justice, and the victims should be allowed to heal. They should be allowed to sort of cope with the trauma that they have gone through. But I would say what is also very important for this new government to do is to put legislation in place so that such human rights abuses and flagrant violation of civil liberties do not happen. And in this regard, I would like to particularly underscore the whole issue of internet freedom. We need to put a mechanism so that in future, no government is allowed or is able to shut off internet and deny people the right to communicate at their will. And I think those are very important things. But this government is very steadfastly committed to protecting civil liberties and ensuring human rights. And in line with various international protocols, for example, they have already pledged that they will sign the international protocol about enforced disappearances, which was a huge concern during the previous regime.
This has been truly an insightful discussion with you. I have learned a tremendous amount myself in this time together. I'm going to ask you, as I always do all the guests, to recommend a book, but to the audience. But before that, I want to give you an opportunity to offer any of your own closing thoughts about this issue, and then I'll let you then give your book recommendation. We'll go from there.
In closing thoughts, I would say that as a Bangladeshi, and as a Bangladeshi who was born in the 80s and who's seen this country's trajectory over the last 40 years, I am really excited. I am excited because a new chapter has begun in Bangladesh, a new chapter which is the result of a people's revolution, a new chapter where once again people have found their voice. I have found my voice, and I'm able to talk freely, the kind of discussion that I was able to have with you today. I again want to underscore, even at the risk of sounding repetitive, I would not be able to do even a few months ago. We have a very arduous journey ahead of stabilizing our country, stabilizing the economy, once again aligning our country with the rules-based international order is very important for us. And also creating this new chapter for Bangladesh. We have to remember that the many revolutions have taken place across the world over the last decade or even the last 2 or 3 decades. Winds of change blow, and sometimes the revolutions become a false dawn. So it is very important, and we owe it to the martyrs of this monsoon revolution, that our revolution does not become a false dawn. And the true aspirations, the true goals of the people of Bangladesh are realized once again. And that is my dream, that is my aspiration as a Bangladeshi, that I want to see a country which will be a just and equitable society, which will be a democratic society, and which will establish a really equitable order for the people of Bangladesh, for which we had waged our freedom struggle in 1971.
No, thank you for that. And the book recommendation?
Book which I would like to recommend is a book called Pathways of Autocratization, The Tumultuous Journey of Bangladesh Politics, by Professor Ali Riaz. Professor Ali Riaz is a distinguished professor of political science at Illinois State University in the US and a non-resident senior fellow of the Atlantic Council. The book, basically, the reason I want to recommend is it's published by Routledge. It offers a novel framework for understanding the processes that erode democracy and lead to autocracy, and explain a specific instance of democratic backsliding in Bangladesh. And I think in order to understand this revolution and what we need to do ahead, we need to understand what caused this revolution at the first place. So we are back to the first question, which at the beginning of this webinar. And I sincerely hope that this book will inform the readers about the pathways to autocratization, and which ultimately led to this revolution and the task ahead for us. Professor Ali Riaz has written numerous other books, but this is his latest tome, and I thought this is something that captures the essence of this discussion very well.
Shafqat, thank you for spending this time with us. And we know you woke up very early for this, but we are so much better for the time that you have given us today. And so again, thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's wonderful to be here, and greetings to all the APCSS Ohana out there. Thank you.
Indeed. As we conclude today's discussion, it's clear that the revolution in Bangladesh is not just a pivotal moment in the nation's history, but also a critical event with far-reaching implications for regional stability and global dynamics. Bangladesh faces immense challenges, and the international community's role in supporting a peaceful and constructive transition will be crucial. Now, I encourage you to join us later this week on August 30th for our next Security Nexus webinar, North Korea-Russia Alliance, Economic and Geopolitical Implications, with Rachel Min-Young Lee of the Stimson Center. In that session, we'll explore the evolving North Korea-Russia relationship and its political, economic, and domestic impacts on North Korea. From all of us at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii, thank you for being part of this important conversation. I'm James Minnich, and until we meet again, aloha oi. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.